Will Matt Rempe be a regular for the Rangers in 2023-2024? What can we expect from the Rangers' resident giant? And how will the likely fourth line of Rempe, Vesey, and Carrick fare in this upcoming season?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1135 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. And so for today's episode, figure we kind of continue along with our off-season series here, our fun-filled off-season series. We do this between seasons every single year, and we're going to continue it right here. Basically, it's best and worst case scenario. We're taking a look at different players on the Rangers, guys that we project will be on the opening night roster. And for today's episode, thought we could go ahead and talk about the fourth line, the likely fourth line, at least what I have projected to be the Rangers' fourth line at the start of the year. Of course, there are no guarantees of any of this, but my fourth line for the Rangers to start the year, I think is going to be Jimmy Vesey, Sam Carrick, and Matt Rempe. And we'll go ahead and go through all three players today. We're going to start with Jimmy Vesey. And as we always do on here, we'll start with the worst case scenario things, and then we'll move on to the best case scenario stuff, because it's always good to end on the positives and glass half full, all that good stuff. So Jimmy Vesey, worst case scenario for the New York Rangers in this upcoming season. I think in a worst case, there could be a situation where at one time or another, and this would likely be through no fault of his own. This is something that I touched on a couple episodes back. I don't even remember exactly what we were talking about, but I threw out this idea when it comes to Jimmy Vesey and really all the Ranger fourth liners at one time or another. Jimmy Vesey this upcoming season, it's at least possible that he could get squeezed out of the Ranger lineup. And again, it won't really be his fault when that happens. It'll very likely be a situation where the Rangers want to go with a Brandon Othman, a Brett Berard, any forward that they call up and see as, an impact player who can make this team better right here and right now. Somebody with a little bit more upside than, say, a Jimmy Vesey. It's interesting. It's very easy to forget this, but last season, Jimmy Vesey, believe it or not, was actually a healthy scratch on opening night. I remember they were doing the player introductions there at Madison Square Garden, and he was out there for the Rangers, and he was out there, full-on suit and tie for that game. I believe that was last season. But yeah, he was a healthy scratch a couple of times early in the season in favor of Tyler Pitlick. The two of them were kind of rotating in and out of the lineup early, and then Jimmy Vesey, after being a healthy scratch a couple times early in the season, he ends up playing a grand total of 80 out of the 82 games, and he did that through his hard work, being a valuable penalty killer, bunch of other stuff as well. Can give you some depth scoring every once in a while as well. But yeah, he's gonna have to earn it this year, like he has to do every single season. There are some young Ranger forwards who are, knocking on the door a little bit. I think namely, again, Othman and Berard come to mind before anybody else. You could maybe throw Adam Sikora in there as well, although he is still very young. But yeah, Jimmy Vesey, I think in a worst case, and you got to remember the trade deadline as well. The Rangers could make some move at the trade deadline, bring in some forwards, a forward or two, whatever the case might be. But Jimmy Vesey, again, through no fault of his own, I would say. But in a worst case scenario, certainly it may be at least a possibility to, eventually be squeezed out of the lineup as a healthy scratch. I think also in a worst case scenario, we see Jimmy Vesey in a situation where he's unable to really produce any offense. And as we look at this fourth line, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but, Jimmy Vesey, if he is on the fourth line, he's going to be out there with Sam Carrick and Matt Rempe. Neither guy is obviously going to put up a ton of points. That means Jimmy Vesey's point production could suffer as well. But Jimmy Vesey, the last couple of years has been able to put up, a respectable amount of points for the Rangers, especially for somebody that has typically played in the bottom six. He's gotten a couple chances on that top line with Mika and Kreider, just the way everybody else on this team has at one time or another. But for the most part, a bottom sixer is Jimmy Vesey. But you look at his career totals, he's never had more than 35 points in a season. But his most productive seasons have all come with the Rangers. His first stint here and his second stint here, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. But you look at, other stops that he's had along the way with the Devils, 15 points in 68 games. With the Canucks, 3 points in 20 games. With the Leafs, it was 7 points in 30 games. And with the Sabres, 12 points in 64 games. He tends to produce more offensively when he's a member of the Rangers. And that kind of leads me into what I want to talk about here. Best case scenarios for Jimmy Vesey. I think in a best case scenario, you see maybe he ends up with a new career high in points. Vesey's top 5 scoring seasons in his NHL career are the 5 seasons that he has spent as a member of the New York Rangers. He was a complete journeyman in the middle of all that, but he started with the Rangers 3 years there, and this will now be his 3rd season with the Rangers since rejoining the team. And his career high, as far as points is concerned, is 35. He did that back in 2018, 2019, during his first run with the New York Rangers. Last year, he had 26 points. I think a career high in points for Jimmy Vesey is possible in an absolute best case scenario. It might be difficult, like I said, because he's probably going to be on the 4th line more often than any other line. He's not going to be out there with any offensive juggernauts. I think that much is pretty obvious, but an absolute best case scenario, if everything kind of falls his way, who knows? I mean, the way they rotate the door, top line right wing, maybe he gets another run with Mika and Kreider at one point or another. But in a best case scenario, I think he can go ahead and beat those numbers. I think also in a best case scenario is he does what he did last year, basically, and continues to prove his worth to this team, doing all the little things right, not making a lot of mistakes, and shows himself as somebody that just cannot be removed from the lineup. And he's not going to be firmly entrenched in the lineup because he suddenly becomes a point per game player. That's not going to happen. But if he continues to do all the things, all the little things correctly, plays with some grit, battles for the puck, is very strong on the penalty kill, good defensive forward in general, somebody that'll go out there and mix it up when the time is right, plays every shift like it's his last. If he can go out there and still be that dude, then he will make himself very, very difficult to remove from the lineup, just as he did this past season for the New York Rangers. I think also in a best case scenario, he continues to be one of the key cogs in the Rangers elite penalty kill unit. This is one of Vesey's, this is kind of his meal ticket. This is how this guy can stay in the lineup night in, night out every single season. The Rangers last year on the penalty kill in the regular season, number 3 in the league. Jimmy Vesey definitely had a role in that. And when you look at, the Ranger forwards, the guys there be killing penalties, we did see both Barclay Goodrow and Alex Wenberg move on. Barclay Goodrow plays on waivers. Sharks picked him up. And Alex Wenberg, was just a rental. He signs, where'd he end up? I think he ended up on the Sharks as well, if I'm not mistaken. But they're both gone. That opens up some opportunities for some other penalty killers. You got to figure Jimmy Vesey is going to be in the mix for that role as well. And that being the case, if he can continue to excel and do very well in those situations, then that's a ticket for him staying in the lineup for this Ranger team and continuing to be a valuable player for this Ranger team in this upcoming season. So we are, I think that's everything. I mean, the grittiness, I already mentioned that. I do have that as kind of a bullet point here. But yeah, a lot of people kind of, talk about how the Rangers don't have grit and they don't have this and that. And I think those issues, they're somewhat there when you're up against certainly a team like the Panthers. I do think the Rangers' grit and toughness, though, does tend to be underrated, and the stats bear that out as well. But Jimmy Vesey, very gritty player. He'll go in there and, fight for the puck like his life depends on it. So you love to see things like that. So we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. We've covered the left wing. We're going to move over to center and talk about really the guy who, I guess by default almost, is the Rangers' most significant free agent signing this offseason. Got to remember Riley Smith. It happened during the free agency signing period, during that flurry, but that was a trade. So technically, yes, Sam Carrick, the biggest free agent pickup for the New York Rangers this offseason, and we will discuss him in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You've got Gametime Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You've got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You've also got seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And of course, the lowest price guarantee. You get the lowest price possible, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And Gametime ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, okay, go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Going to continue talking about the Ranger fourth line, or what we project to be the Ranger fourth line. As far as the everydayers are concerned, can't thank you guys enough for always sticking with the Locked On New York Ranger podcast. We're going to be continuing with our best and worst case scenarios going forward. Going to be eventually moving on to the defenseman here. Definitely looking forward to that. And also going to be trying to line up some guests for you guys between now and the start of the preseason, and certainly between now and the start of the regular season. But for right now, let's go ahead, continue breaking down the Ranger fourth line. And we're going to move over to center. The likely opening night center for the Rangers is going to be Sam Carrick. We'll start with the worst case scenario, as we always do. I think in a worst case scenario for Sam Carrick is he simply does not play well enough to remain a fixture in this New York Ranger lineup. Every season, and this is true whether it's the Rangers or really any team in the NHL, but you look at the opening night roster, the likely opening night roster, and you're trying to figure out who's going to play with who and what the role is going to be and how much ice time is everybody going to get and all that good stuff. But you can also typically ID, 2, maybe 3 players where their grip on a spot in the lineup, as far as being out there every single night, is tenuous at best. And I think Sam Carrick is certainly one of those guys. And something against Sam Carrick. Look, if he does well, we're all happy. The Rangers do well. They win games. They're a Stanley Cup contender. We love it. If he can maintain his grip on that fourth line center role, then more power to him. And I hope he does do it. But again, you look at the roster. You take last year, for example, 2 of the guys that kind of stood out in that way certainly were Tyler Pitlick, and to a lesser extent, even though he lasted less time than Tyler Pitlick, I would throw Nick Bonino in there as well. And lo and behold, the 2 of them, I mean, Pitlick was still with the Wolfpack at the end of the season, but they never called him back up, or at least didn't put him into any games. So, yeah, I mean, those guys exist every single season. I think Sam Carrick might be that guy going into this upcoming season. The one thing kind of working in his favor is that the Rangers are kind of thin at center. I mean, if everybody's healthy, the center's looking good if everybody's healthy, because you got Mika and Trocheck on the top 2 lines. You got Filipino on the third line. Hopefully he can have a resurgent season and get through all the concussion issues that he's had and everything there, and all the best to Filipino for sure. But after that, I mean, it's basically Carrick, Johnny Brodzinski. He could be an option for the fourth line as well to center that line. But I think the fact that the Rangers are a little bit thin there, and the fact that they don't have any big time prospects at center that are ready to go and ready to hit the ground running this upcoming season, that works in Carrick's favor. And that could be a reason why, he ends up making it through the season as a member of the Ranger roster. But in a worst case scenario, especially for Sam Carrick, that does not happen. And he eventually, naturally kind of gets his place taken over in the lineup. I think also in a worst case scenario, we come to see him as a downgrade from Barclay Goodrow. Right now, it's pretty obvious that the Rangers, they won't say the quiet part out loud, but they see him as a cheaper version of Barclay Goodrow. I mean, that's basically what it is. They're not going to be that blunt about it. And, I certainly understand why. But, Sam Carrick is making $1 million a season. Barclay Goodrow is making $3.64 million per season. Similar builds, similar playing style. And I think they envision a very similar role for Sam Carrick as far as him taking over the role that Barclay Goodrow used to have. But I do think that if Carrick doesn't really do anything, if he's struggling, if he's looking like a defensive liability, I mean, we're not expecting offensive fireworks, certainly from Sam Carrick. But in a worst case scenario, you're going to see fans get tired of him quickly, because that's just kind of how it is. It's not just Ranger fans. It's fans of any hockey team. A lot of times you want to see the next big prospect come along and get a spot in the lineup and go out there and do what they do. And if they perceive that a journeyman veteran is blocking the path to a prospect, and they tend to take out their frustrations on said journeyman. But yeah, I mean, the other thing here too, and this is how fickle we can all be as Ranger fans, because, I didn't want to see Barclay Goodrow leave either. It's one of those things where if he was making Sam Carrick money, he'd probably still be here. But you look at what Barclay Goodrow did in the playoffs last year, and a lot of the people that were calling for him to be out of the lineup, make him a healthy scratch, do this, do that, get him off the team. All of a sudden, he goes out there in the playoffs, starts scoring all these goals, these clutch goals. He had an overtime winner. All of a sudden, you become a little bit more fond of Barclay Goodrow. And just when you're starting to, come around to the idea of, maybe he is worth all that money, next thing you know, he's gone. And so that being the case, if Sam Carrick struggles, we're going to hear it. We're going to see Twitter start blowing up, and everybody's going to be talking about how, they should have never gotten rid of Barclay Goodrow. He should still be here. It's not that much of a price difference between Goodrow and Sam Carrick. That will happen. And, Carrick is going to have to hit the ground running and, play well if he's going to win over this fan base. I think that is for sure. Best case scenarios for Sam Carrick. He brings the physicality. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me. Probably the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of you as well. If you're a veteran journeyman player, as I just mentioned in the last section, it can be tough to win over Ranger fans, and probably very similar for other fan bases as well. But one of the surefire ways to do that, I think, especially with Ranger fans, is to bring that physicality. Go out there, do it clean, nothing dirty, but go out there and throw the body and throw your weight around, impose your will, and play with a little bit of an edge and a little bit of a mean streak. And I think Sam Carrick certainly capable of doing exactly that. That's always a good place to start, because when it comes to scoring, anything can happen. Like, any player in the NHL can go through a scoring slump here or there. And, you just come to accept that over time, that, nobody's automatic. And even the best players in the world do go through some scoring droughts from time to time. The physicality, though, that's something that doesn't really have to slump. And obviously with Sam Carrick, we're not looking for a bunch of offense. We're looking for physicality. We're looking for penalty killing. We're looking for somebody who hopefully plays a little bit of an edge, can win some faceoffs here and there as well. Just do a bunch of the little things to remain in the lineup. He does have 478 hits in 240 career games. So he does go out there and he does mix it up a little bit, and he does play physical hockey. I think also in the best case scenario for Sam Carrick is he becomes somebody that becomes sort of a go-to player for Peter Laviolette and this coaching staff when it comes to tight games. I always really find it interesting at the end of games when it's really close. It's a one-goal game either way. I mean, if the Rangers are down by a goal, we know who's going to be out there in the last minute, last 90 seconds. You're going to get basically the top power play unit plus Lafreniere whenever the goalie gets pulled. Those are going to be the 6 guys. When they're up by a goal, though, that's where it gets interesting. Like, who do you really trust in those situations? And I think in a best-case scenario, look, Laviolette, I mean, I think he's better for younger players than some of the other recent Ranger coaches, but all these coaches, to one extent or another, there's certain spots in the game, certain situations where they like a good veteran to be on the ice. And I think Sam Carrick, if he plays well, if he's a good defensive forward, then you'll see him maybe grab a role like that. That's a best case scenario for Sam Carrick. Maybe he's somebody that can be trusted late in games, up by a goal, a minute left. Maybe Sam Carrick's on the ice. I get the feeling there's other people they'd probably go to first, but if he plays well enough and, consistently enough, then you could see his role expand. You could see him on the ice in situations like that late in games. So that pretty much does it for Sam Carrick. In just a second, we are going to round out the group of Ranger forwards. We're going to move on to the man of the hour, somebody that captured the attention of, I mean, honestly, not just Ranger fans, but really hockey fans. Everybody had an opinion on Matt Rempe last season. Only played 17 regular season games, handful of playoff games as well. But something of a cult hero is Matt Rempe already this early in his career. So we are going to, in just a second, go ahead and talk about Matt Rempe best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season. All right, let's go keep everything rolling. Round out the forward group with the one and only Matt Rempe. We'll do this the same way we've been doing it. Worst case scenarios followed by best case scenarios. Worst case scenario is the rest of Matt Rempe's game is just not on the same level as his physicality. As I mentioned a second ago, talking about Carrick, physicality is not something that ever really needs to go through really any kind of a slump. But look, we know Matt Rempe can hit, and based on his sheer size alone, we know he can fight and be effective in that role. He's going to tower over he's going to tower over literally all of his opponents because he is the tallest player currently in the NHL. I don't know if there's any rookies coming along that maybe you haven't beat, but as of now, the tallest player in the NHL. But you just hope that the other aspects of his game can kind of keep up with that. And there's a chance that might not be the case. We saw last season, Matt Rempe was in and out of the lineup at certain times. There were times where he'd be in the lineup. And this is especially true in the playoffs. But then you get into the third period, and he's basically glued to the bench. And he doesn't see the ice, and they just don't quite have all the trust in him as of yet. Still obviously a very raw player. To put him on the ice in really tense moments, tight games that are late, getting late in the third period, whatever the situation might be. And if that continues to be the case where the rest of his game just isn't quite up to, par with the physicality that Matt Rempe brings every single night, then you might see a similar situation where, he's essentially glued to the bench for chunks of the game, or something else happens. And it's something else that I think would happen for Matt Rempe in a Matt Rempe worst case scenario. I'm personally not completely opposed to this, but I know most Ranger fans would be. And certainly Matt Rempe wants to make this team. But in a worst case scenario, Matt Rempe, again, for him and for most Ranger fans, he would start this upcoming season in the AHL. I don't hate this idea. I think, he's talked openly about wanting to work on his skating and wanting to work on puck handling and wanting to work, wants to be a member of the penalty kill and, wants to be a better defensive forward. And that's all well and good. It's awesome that Matt Rempe wants to work on all these different parts of his game and doesn't want to just cruise on being a fighter and being able to hit people pretty hard. But where can you do that most effectively? Well, probably the AHL. It's a lot easier down there. Take nothing away from anybody in the AHL because they obviously have tremendous talent as well. But it's not exactly trying to stop Connor McDavid in the NHL, is it? Right. So, and the stakes are lower in the AHL. And that's not to say that the players don't care, the fans don't care, or anything like that. Nothing could be further from the truth, but it's not the same as the NHL. And that's where he can really kind of hone his craft. I'm sure he'd get a lot more ice time per night playing with the Hartford Wolfpack rather than the Rangers. So I don't hate that idea at all. In fact, I've said in the past, I think I kind of favor it. Just give him a handful of games in the AHL to start the season. I'm probably in the minority there. But for Matt Rempe personally, in a worst case scenario, that is what could happen. He could start the season in the AHL. And not even just for the reasons I just mentioned, there could also be tactical reasons for that as well. When you look at the other players in the Rangers, a lot of them are not waiver exempt. Matt Rempe's waiver exempt. So if they send him down to the Wolfpack, he doesn't have to pass through waivers or anything like that. They can just send him right down and he'll be on his way playing for the Wolfpack. But if they're kind of like torn at the start of the season, like whether to send down Matt Rempe or whether to send down Johnny Brodzinski, I don't want Johnny Brodzinski being sent down because, first of all, I like Brodzinski. He, once again, if that happened, would have to pass through waivers. And I don't want to take the chance of him getting claimed. Now, look, there could be room for both of them, on the NHL roster. There probably would be. I think Johnny Brodzinski, you're looking at him maybe starting the season as the 13th forward. And Matt Rempe will be in the lineup as kind of the 12th forward. And somebody like Adam Edstrom, he'd probably be the guy that would start the upcoming season in the AHL. And he doesn't have to pass through waivers either. But yeah, I don't want, a potentially valuable player having to go through waivers. Somebody like Johnny Brodzinski, not that he's going to set the world on fire either, but he is a solid player and does play hard for the Rangers. So worst case scenario for Matt Rempe, for any number of reasons. And again, for him personally, more so than myself. But in a worst case scenario for Matt Rempe, he does not make the team, has to start the season in the AHL. Let's move on to the good stuff for Matt Rempe, the best case scenarios. I think in a best case for Matt Rempe, he continues to make opponents very uncomfortable. And I'm not just talking about from the physicality and the fighting standpoint. Look, the guy's as tall as a skyscraper. He's big. He's built. He's got a mean streak. He's willing to mix it up. And he throws some pretty gigantic hits that certainly get the attention of Ranger fans everywhere. But it's not just the physical side of everything I just described. It's the mental side of that as well. We saw last season. These are the things that, for everybody that wants to talk about Matt Rempe and people that don't like him, he's a goon, he's this, he's that, all he can do is fight. The effect that he has that does not show up in the box score is, I think, kind of the mental games that he can play with opponents. Whether it's after a whistle, doing a little bit of talking, a little bit of jawing. Obviously, the NHL has a lot of that. But I think what really stood out to me last year, as far as something that does not make it into the box office, there were times last year, the Rangers would dump the puck into the offensive zone, right? And a defenseman for their opponent would go back there behind the net, got to go get the puck. There were times where Matt Rempe was on the ice, and these defensemen were well aware of it, and they would have some issues with the puck because I think they kind of sense, man, I've got this giant bearing down on me here. If this guy hits me, it's going to hurt. He's like he's shot out of a cannon. There's going to be a big time impact there. And we saw defensemen in those situations, either miss the puck entirely, fumble the puck a little bit, maybe turn the puck over, trying to move it a little bit too quickly. Matt Rempe, for that role in and of itself, is very valuable to the Rangers. Somebody that can get in there on the forecheck and really make these defensemen a little bit unsure of themselves. Not just defensemen. Look, you got to keep your head up when you're on the ice with Matt Rempe. That's the bottom line. Anybody going through the open ice, if Matt Rempe can square you up, he's going to hit you as hard as he possibly can, and it's not going to feel very good. And for the most part, Matt Rempe had all these thunderous hits. The one against the Devils was pretty bad, and he ended up getting suspended 4 games for it. Other than that, though, I mean, I didn't see Matt Rempe do anything that I would classify as dirty last season. He will hit you as hard as he can, and he wants you to feel it, but I don't think he's out there, looking to injure people or do anything serious in that regard. Certainly he wants some, bumps and bruises, but nothing beyond that. So, yeah, best case scenario for Matt Rempe, he continues to do something that, like I said, does not always show up in the box score, but just by being out there, his presence to make opponents very, very uncomfortable. I think also in the best case for Matt Rempe, he puts the teachings that he's gotten this offseason to very good use. For starters, he was with George Laraque. I believe it was for 3 days. I want to say in Ontario, somewhere in Canada. But he was with him for 3 days. He wanted to work with him on his fighting technique. And George Laraque, great guy to learn from, got into just an absolute ton of fights in his NHL career. Very feared enforcer. But I shouldn't even call him an enforcer because he actually got a lot more points than I think a lot of people probably realize, especially when you consider how little ice time he was getting and how much time he was spending in the penalty box. Certainly not a one-dimensional player in his own right, but he was working with Matt Rempe on his fighting techniques. And, hopefully Matt Rempe learns from that and he's a little bit better equipped to protect himself. I mean, look, you look at his size and it's like, he doesn't need a lot of protecting, but there is some technique. It's not just throwing bombs, which we know he can do. You gotta be able to protect yourself out there a little bit as well. And it looked like the two of them, had a good time together, but also, Matt Rempe certainly learned some things from George Laraque while he was there. He also, Matt Rempe, has apparently been spending some time this offseason with Chris Kreider and Jonathan Quick in Connecticut. I thought the plan initially was for him to live with the Quick family, and then I was hearing that he's going to be living with Chris Kreider instead. But either way, these are two very highly respected veterans. Jonathan Quick, a slam dunk Hall of Famer. Chris Kreider, I think at one time or another, he will have his number in the Madison Square Garden rafters. And obviously been in New York for a very, very long time, by far the longest tenured Ranger. You can learn a lot from both of these guys as far as just being a professional NHL hockey player. And hopefully Kreider has worked with him on different aspects of his game as well. And hopefully Rempe's just been a sponge and just taken in, all these teachings from all these different sources throughout this entire offseason here. I think also in a best case scenario for Matt Rempe, he becomes a permanent member of the New York Ranger lineup. Last year he burst onto the scene and everybody was excited, and what a way to debut. Literally 1 second into his first NHL shift, he's dropping the gloves with Matt Martin. And that would be kind of amazing in its own right. The fact that it was also an outdoor game just kind of added to the mystique or whatever you want to call it. But he got into that fight and he took on all the NHL's enforcers throughout the entire season, one pretty much after another. But if he can do what I was talking about a little bit earlier, hone his craft a little bit, work on some of the finer points of his game, and bring all the physicality and be an enforcer, then at that point, I mean, what reason really is there to take Matt Rempe out of the lineup for any of the games? And certainly he has a ways to go. 6th-round pick, rookie last season, still very young. I think he's still 21 years old. So, he's got to fine-tune certain parts of his game for sure. But if he can do that, and again, combine that with all the physicality, then it gets to a point where there's really no reason for this guy to not be in the lineup. Last year, we never knew for sure, game to game. I'm sure Rempe didn't know for sure either. We were always checking the lineups. You got to get Rempe in there. But when it becomes when it gets to a point where it's just common sense that he's going to be out there, if we get there, that's going to be a wonderful moment, certainly for Matt Rempe and all the Rempe maniacs out there as well. Figure we can pretty much call it there for today. I did want to once again mention our Locked On New York Rangers Fantasy League. We are going to be having a draft probably in early October, right before the regular season starts there. And if you played last year and you went back in, get in touch with me. Let me know. That's all you got to do. If you did not play last year, do the same thing. Get in touch with me, email, DM on Twitter, whatever you got to do, and we'll save your place in line. And sooner or later, we're going to go forward with our 20-team Locked On New York Ranger Fantasy League. I'll keep everybody posted there. Also, still looking to hear all of your best stories from the New York Ranger playoff wins from this past season. We've done this in the past with Panarin against the Penguins, with Derek Stepan against the Capitals. Send me your best stories, what you were doing, who you were with, how you reacted this past playoff run for the Rangers during any of the 4 overtime wins that this team had, during their run last season. And I'll read that in a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers. One last little bit of news here before we call it. I'm going to be, if you're hearing this episode, it's at least Thursday. But I'm going to be going on vacation from Thursday through the following Monday. Nothing really changes. Not going to miss any episodes. Locked On New York Rangers, as well as all the other Locked On NHL podcasts, are still at 3 episodes per week. But then the week after that, which is the week that starts, let's see here, September 16th, that is the week that Locked On Rangers and all other Locked On NHL podcasts all go back to 5 episodes per week. So definitely looking forward to doing that. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. That little off season that we have there where it's only 3 episodes per week, that doesn't last long. We'll be back to 5 episodes then, and it'll be 5 episodes through the preseason, the regular season, the postseason, good chunk of the off season as well. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.